How you doing? It's Will, the Chula Vista Backyard Gardener. And today I want to talk to you about what's working for me recently with all my grafts taken. And that's when it comes to citrus, stone fruit, and my favorite, which is avocados here. So in year one, I got 0 grafts to take. In year two, about 20 to 25%. And this year, I'm getting like 90%, which is pretty good for grafts. And I just want to talk to you about what's working and what kind of changes I made. I want to throw it out there that I'm not an expert. So if you have any comments or suggestions, go ahead and put it down in the comments because I'm willing to listen. So let's get started. One of the goals of this video is to try to help you get from this here, which is the grafting stage, these stages here, to move on to stage here where your grafts are pushing. And of course, the final stage is when your tree or your grafts are producing fruit. So as I stand in front of this 4-year-old seedling that I've attempted to graft onto maybe about 3 seasons, the first 2 failed, and I have 5 or 6 different varieties pushing on it this year, I want to touch on the first point, which is patience. So with grafting, you have to be patient. It's a strange phenomenon where you can do the same thing over and over, and sometimes they just take longer or they fail. You pretty much just have to wait. So if you look here, that's called a Catalina, and this here is a Monroe. So they're green, but the Monroe hasn't pushed yet. But as long as it's green, I'm not giving up on it. So if you look, the Catalina started to push. These were both grafted in early February. If you look here at this Haas, which was grafted about a month ago, it's already pushing leaves. This bacon here is just barely pushing, and it was grafted at the same time as the Haas. This Kahalu'u here is pushing flowers and leaves, and it was grafted maybe a month and a half ago, the same time that this other Kahalu'u was grafted. So everything will take its own time. So with the success, I'll go ahead and show you the failure. This is a bacon grafted the same method as this bacon here that's finally starting to push. So until you see it turn black like that, have patience and don't give up. So let me give you a few more examples of patience before I go to the next point. But this one's dead. I can go ahead and pull it off. I'll cut it back here, and I have a green gold Scion that I'm going to graft onto it later. I almost forgot, this reed here was grafted about 2 weeks ago, and it looks like it's already pushing a flower. So that goes back to my point that all grafts will take their own time. Let me give you another example of being patient with your grafts before I go on to the next topic. So this is another Florida variety along with the Catalina. This is a Monroe, grafted back in February, early February, and it just barely started to push. So I had an inkling to give up on these varieties, but I waited it out, and look here. So I went ahead and had grafted a green gold onto this other split branch here, just in case this one died. And the green gold was grafted maybe I think a month and a half ago, and look at here. Same with this other green gold here. That one was grafted about a month ago. And this Fuerte veneer graft, just see pushing here, was grafted maybe a month and a half ago. They've all passed up this graft. Patience. Just wait. Sometimes they take off like this reed here. I grafted this reed less than a month ago, and it's passed up just about every other graft that I have. So all grafts are different. They'll take their time. Green is good. So as long as it's green, we wait. Give you an example of that. So this is a Monroe veneer grafted onto a large seedling that I'll touch on later when we talk about rootstock, as this seedling really took off in a few months, and I'll talk about how I got it to grow so fast. But I see a little bit of green there, but nothing's pushed yet. So as long as you see green, we're waiting. So we'll give it a chance. You never know. Another good point about waiting: if you decide to attempt to graft in the fall, it takes a lot longer. So this Jan Boyce here and this Mexicola, they just barely started to push out leaves, and I grafted those in October 2019. So what is that? Maybe 6 months. So like I said, if it's green, we're waiting. Another thing I learned from grafting is just because your graft pushes doesn't mean you're in the clear. You're not in the clear until it's pushed out and started producing fruit. So if you look here, this is a Frost Valencia, and it's pushing really well. Right here we have a Smith Red Blood Orange pushing really well. And you see that dead branch there? That's a Smith Red Blood Orange that was pushing really well, and I came out one day and it was burnt up from the sun. And it's right next to this one that's getting more sun than this one. So you're not in the clear until the thing pushes and produces fruit. And along with that, I want to talk about not fidgeting and touching your grafts all the time. So I was up in this tree picking some of these huge lemons, and my head bumped this graft here, and I broke it off. So it was pushing really well, and I bumped it with my head, and that was it. This one, the grasshoppers ate the leaves that pushed. So I'm just leaving it and seeing if it'll come back. Kind of like this Smith Red Blood Orange here was eaten by grasshoppers, and they bounced back and kind of took off. So don't fidget around. I can't tell you how many grafts I've broken just going out checking it every day, touching around on it, you know. See, this is a Mineola Tangelo, and I'm tempted to just, you know, feel it and touch around, but I know better. So if you look there, there's already a little Tangelo forming. Don't touch. Okay, before I get into talking about this cleft graft, which has helped me the most and maybe should be #1 on my list of things that's worked for me, I want to say I had high up on the list is getting good Sian wood. So I've ordered Sian wood from a guy in Florida 3 times now, and I think those last 2 or 3 grafts that I showed you are the only to push. So in about 30 attempts, I got 3 to push so far. So that's a pretty bad percentage. I liken that to maybe the shipping time, as well as he just doesn't ship good Sian wood. So I've noticed that the wood that I get from my mature trees, or that I've gotten from friends recently on my avocado group on Facebook, those have taken better. So the number one thing that I think has worked for me is you're taught. So let's imagine this is the rootstock and this is the Sian wood. You're taught to, here, let's use one that's similar size first. This is a little smaller. We're taught to line up the cambium layers for the rootstock and the Sian wood. Those little green layers you see in there should line up. And if you watch all the videos, they make sure it's flush there on the outside. They run their finger along that edge and it looks something like that. So what I learned, and I can illustrate it better with a smaller piece, is what I do if the Sian wood is smaller than the rootstock. I came up with this theory in my head that the cambium layer on this is a little smaller. The cambium layer on the rootstock is a little wider, so I just slightly come in with that. Maybe that much, so it's not quite flush. And go ahead and wrap it up from there. Can you see that? See, let me see at an angle, maybe you see it. Instead of going flush here, I'm coming in a little bit like that. Imagining the cambium layer on the rootstock is bigger than the cambium layer here. So that brings me to my next point. And I'll take you over to this Kahalu'u, which is the first graft that I ever got to take on seedling from the spring of 2019. If you look here, if I can get it in there. Kind of painted over it, but you'll see the graft union right there. That was done with the grafting tool. So when the Scion and the rootstock sizes match, you may want to consider using the grafting tool. Hold that for me. And how that works is you take your grafting tool and you want to point it downward into the rootstock, and you're pretty much lining it up even, and you're going to cut a U shape into it. Now I'm going to use this piece again, even though you want something the same size. So actually, let's use this one. Now imagine this is the Sian wood. You want to cut a U shape down into that. Try to make it even. Cut. See, it doesn't quite fit that way. You want to spin it around. And it fits better that way. And go ahead and wrap that with parafilm and grafting tape. So you notice these cambium layers line up easy because they're the same size. You can use a smaller or a larger rootstock to cambium layer as long as one of the four sides touch. But with these grafts, all four sides touch. So this tree is doing really well. And let me take you over to my Jan Boyce and show you the same graft union. You may have watched my YouTube video a few months ago. It's really pushing well. It was just grafted back in October. So it's doing well. Probably time to up pot it, but let's show you the graft union there. Right way down here. So I went ahead and painted over it to protect it from the sun. And it's been stored here in the greenhouse. So that brings me to another point that I haven't touched on, is this greenhouse here. It seemed like a lot of my seedlings have taken off, and my grafts have worked ever since I started using this greenhouse. So now that I touched on seedlings, let's talk about how you propagate your seeds to graft onto. So this is what I do. I just stick mine in dirt, or I do the wet paper towel method. So I just Put it in potting mix or soil, whatever you want to use, and keep it moist, and that's it. I don't typically cut off the top. Like, see this one here, it's doing fine, but I got that from someone on my avocado group, and he does the method where he cuts off the top, and that's fine. Whatever works for you. For me, I don't peel them. I just stick them in the dirt and leave more than 75% of that pit above the soil. And I'm telling you, these trees, I've experimented both ways. This is what works for me. So if you look here, this is one of those big, gigantic, watery tasting Florida avocados, but they're excellent rootstock. So this seedling here and this seedling here are probably a little over a month old, and they've just taken off. I've seen seedlings a year old that aren't this big already. So I could have grafted onto this micro grafted 3 weeks ago, and it's about pencil size right now, so well past the micro grafting state. So greenhouse, and this is the way I propagate my seedlings for future grafting. Let me know in the comments which method you prefer. The last point I wanted to make, and probably number 2 on my overall list of what's worked for me, is using larger Sian wood, especially on the mature trees. Not as much on the seedlings. Everything took for me on seedlings, but on a mature tree like this Haas, look at the size of this bacon that I grafted onto here. See it here pushing. It's facing downward, and the leaves are starting to grow up. Look at the size of that Sian. It has to be 8-9 inches long. That was an experiment. And then if you come up, the reed that I showed earlier, it's probably a medium size. This Nishikawa is just starting to push. If you look there, the tip, that's a large, thick Sian. And this one here, you see where the graft point, the graft union is there. See if I'm getting that. There we go. The graft union is there. And you check out how that thing is pushing. I think what someone explained to me is that the large Sians have a lot of stored energy, so they're more likely to take when you graft into a mature tree. And that seems to be true for me. If you look here at this green gold, it's still green. It looks like it's just barely trying to push here. But it was grafted at the same time that the 2 Nishikawas were grafted, and it's nowhere near taking off like those large Sians are. So that's my last point. Go ahead and like, comment, give me your opinion on what works for you, where I can make improvements, and maybe I'll try some of your tips.